The clink of champagne flutes and the soft hum of violins filled the grand hall of the Hawthorne-based Civic Auditorium. Glittering gowns shimmered under chandeliers, and polished shoes echoed against marble floors. It was the kind of night meant for legends and legacy, a celebration of brilliance, prestige, and curated perfection. But beneath the surface of elegance, something was already beginning to unravel. My name is Dr. Elara Whitmore. I'm 38 years old, and tonight I was being honored for my contributions to environmental chemistry and education reform. I should have felt proud, excited even. But there was a pressure in my chest I couldn't shake. It wasn't the crowd. It wasn't the spotlight. It was something much colder, something from the past that never quite let go. I escaped into the restroom just to breathe. My heels clicked against the marble tile, my breath uneven. I stood before the mirror, brushing imaginary dust from the collar of my dark emerald gown. Then the door creaked open behind me. I didn't look up at first. I didn't need to. I could feel the air shift. She walked in like she owned the room. Cornelia Whitmore. My mother. After nearly 20 years, her reflection appeared beside mine like a ghost in a silk wrap. Her lipstick was the same deep wine shade she wore when she dismissed me from her world. Our eyes met in the mirror, and I saw it, the split second of recognition before she masked it with a cool smirk. "Elara," she said, like it was any other night at a country club. "I didn't expect to see you here." I steadied myself. I could say the same. She turned slowly to face me. "Your father and I are donors. We attend these events regularly." "I'm being honored tonight," I replied, watching her expression shift ever so slightly. There was a pause. Not long enough to feel like surprise. Just long enough to feel like judgment. "I see," she said, turning back to her reflection. "Well, everyone finds their way eventually." Her words lodged like thorns in my chest. Suddenly I was 19 again, standing at the bottom of the Whitmore estate staircase, suitcase in hand, told to leave because I had failed to meet the standards of the family name. Depression, they called it weakness. Therapy, they called it indulgence. My choice to study chemistry at a public college instead of joining the corporate ranks. Rebellion. I remember the sting of the door closing behind me, the way my father didn't even come downstairs, the way my mother stayed seated on the velvet couch, tapping away on her phone like I was a leaf being swept out with the evening wind. That night, I wasn't a daughter. I was a disgrace. And yet here she stood now, reapplying her lipstick as if none of it had happened. I stepped away from the mirror. My voice was calm, but my hands trembled. "Do you ever think about that night?" She paused again, still facing the mirror. "What night?" "The night you told me to leave." Cornelia tilted her head as if considering her earrings. "You were unwell. We did what we thought was best." I almost laughed. Best for who? Silence. I didn't expect an apology. She was never the type. But still, something inside me had hoped. Hoped that after all these years, she might have looked at my journey, the degrees, the published research, the students I mentored, and seen something worthy. But she didn't. She never would. "I should get back," I said. "Of course," she replied, barely looking at me. "Good luck tonight." I opened the door and walked out into the noise of the gala, my heart pounding. The lights seemed brighter, the music louder. My mother was here, which meant he might be too. Silas Whitmore. My father. The man who signed the check for my tuition withdrawal form. The man who sent back every birthday card I had dared to send. The man who once told me I was a bad investment. I took a glass of water from a passing server, trying to steady my breath. I had survived more than just exile from my family. I had built something on my own. I had rebuilt myself. But tonight something was shifting. Something I couldn't yet see. And then, over the crowd, I heard my name. "Dr. Elara Whitmore, will you please join us at the stage?" The moment had arrived, but the past was still in the room. Applause echoed through the hall as I walked toward the stage, each step a strange fusion of triumph and dread. The floor beneath me felt too polished, the lights too sharp. My heels clicked like a countdown. I had been dreaming of this moment for years. The acknowledgement, the recognition, the validation. But now that it was here, I felt the walls closing in. As I reached the podium, I caught a glimpse of the plaque beside the lectern. My name etched in gold, Dr. Elara Whitmore. excellence in scientific impact and educational reform, a wave of disbelief hit me. I was no longer the girl sleeping on a futon in a stranger's apartment, cramming chemistry notes between diner shifts. I was standing here, in front of politicians, donors, scientists, and students. But my eyes kept scanning the crowd. I saw faces I didn't recognize, alumni, reporters, board members, but not his. Not Silas. Not yet. The host, a silver-haired gentleman named Carlton May, began speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered tonight to celebrate innovation and dedication in the scientific field. This year's honoree has not only advanced research in sustainable chemical solutions, but has reshaped how young minds view science education. Please join me in honoring Dr. Elara Whitmore. Applause burst again, louder this time. I forced a smile, adjusted the microphone, and began my speech. I'm honored to stand before you tonight, not just as a scientist, but as someone who believes that education is the seed of change. I started small, a community college, a dorm that smelled of burnt coffee and hope. I didn't have connections, I didn't have endorsements, but I had questions, and I had the will to keep asking them, no matter how many doors closed in my face. There was a stillness in the audience, the kind that only happens when people are truly listening. I'm proud of the research my team and I have produced, but I'm more proud of the students who've gone on to teach, to discover, and to challenge the systems that once told them they didn't belong. A standing ovation followed. I bowed my head slightly and stepped back, letting Carlton return to the microphone. And now, he said with a smile, a special announcement. For the first time in our history, tonight's award is accompanied by a grant of $2 million. This generous gift will allow Dr. Whitmore to expand her work globally, continuing to influence generations to come. Gasps spread across the room like electricity. Even I blinked in surprise. $2 million, Carlton continued. This remarkable contribution comes from a donor who wishes to remain anonymous, though they have long supported science and education across our nation. I froze. An anonymous donor? Then I saw it, a movement in the shadows near the back of the room. A tall figure in a tailored charcoal suit, flanked by a security aide. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even seated. Silas Whitmore, my father. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his jaw clenched, his arms stiff at his sides. And for a single unbearable second, our eyes locked. He turned and walked out. The applause dimmed in my ears. The gold plaque seemed to blur. The grant, the gala, the celebration, it all collapsed into silence. My fingers curled around the edges of the podium. I had imagined every version of this night, but not this one. Not him walking out the moment I was finally being seen. I turned to Carlton. May I? He stepped aside without hesitation. I leaned toward the microphone again, my voice steady but cold. Thank you. Truly. But I need to step away for a moment. The murmurs began immediately as I descended from the stage and made my way toward the exit, the air suddenly thick and unbearable. I wasn't chasing him. I told myself that. But my feet moved too fast, too determined, for it to be anything else. Outside, the air was sharp and cool, tinged with ocean wind from the bay. I spotted him by a black sedan, one hand gripping the door, the other pressed to his temple like the night had become too loud. Silas! I called out, breathless. He turned slowly as if it pained him. I wondered how long it would take you. I stepped closer. You knew. Of course I knew, he spat. I saw your name on the program the moment I arrived. I hoped it was a misprint. I felt the sting like ice against my skin. And yet the company still sent the money. That wasn't my decision, he growled. It was handled by the board, a public initiative. I had no idea it would land in your hands. I narrowed my eyes. So you left. Again. Just like before. You were a mistake, he said quietly, too quietly. You've always been a mistake. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were new, but because this time they came after everything I had achieved. I stared at him, at the man who once held my childhood in the palm of his hand and crushed it beneath his legacy. And I realized something. I wasn't chasing him. I was walking away from him. For good. I turned around and left him there, standing in the cold, under the soft glow of the gala's exterior lights. The night was far from over. but the past was finally fading into silence. I stepped back into the auditorium through the rear hallway, the noise muffled but constant. Waitstaff glided by with silver trays, and distant laughter echoed like a language I no longer spoke. My hands trembled as I smoothed my gown. The crowd didn't know what had just happened. To them, I had simply stepped away, overwhelmed by the moment. They would never guess I had come face to face with the man who discarded me like yesterday's plans. I needed air. Real air. I veered past the double doors and slipped into a side garden behind the venue. It was mostly empty, save for a few guests on smoke breaks, whispering into phones. I leaned against the railing that overlooked the bay, my chest rising and falling with every wave below. I thought the award would be the end of something, a closure, but it wasn't. It was a beginning I hadn't prepared for. The wind tangled my hair as memories rushed back, so many of them anchored in silence. My parents never yelled. No slamming doors. No dramatic scenes. Just absence. Just cold dismissals. Just rooms that went quiet the moment I entered. I remembered being 15, sitting at the dinner table across from Cornelia, trying to explain the weight I felt in my chest every morning. "It's like breathing underwater," I said. She reached for her wine glass and didn't answer. My father cleared his throat and asked me to pass the salt. That was the pattern. If something couldn't be photographed or bragged about, it didn't exist. A rustle behind me snapped me back. I turned, half expecting one of them to follow. But instead, a woman approached. She wore a red coat over a sleek black dress and carried a purse shaped like a book. Her hair was silver, clipped back in a loose braid. I recognized her instantly. "Dr. Leclerc?" I said, surprised. She smiled. "Please, call me Jo. Aunt Jo, my mother's younger sister. The only family member who hadn't vanished when I needed them most." "I was sitting in the back," she said, her voice warm and steady. "I knew you'd need a moment, so I waited." My throat tightened. "You came. I wouldn't have missed it for the world." We sat on a nearby bench, the garden light casting soft shadows between us. Jo pulled something from her purse, a folded envelope. She placed it in my hand. "What is this?" I asked. "A letter from your grandmother. She wrote it before she passed. Left it with me because she didn't trust your parents to give it to you." I blinked. I didn't even know she was sick. Jo's eyes softened with a mix of sorrow and frustration. "They didn't tell you." I figured they wouldn't. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. The handwriting was shaky, but still elegant. "My darling Elara, *, I know I wasn't the kind of grandmother you deserved. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, especially when your parents turned their backs. But I watched. I listened. I believed in you, even when they didn't. I only wish I had said it aloud while I had the chance. I hope one day you will forgive our silences. Love, Grandmother Edith, *. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. For years, I had told myself I didn't care, that I didn't need their approval or their love. But in that moment, the letter cracked something open. Because the silence had always hurt more than the anger ever could. Jo reached over and took my hand. "You built this, Elara. Not them. Not their money. You. And it scares them." I nodded, brushing a tear from my cheek. "I didn't want to feel this tonight." "I know," she said. "But sometimes, healing comes disguised as hurt." A faint chime rang from inside the auditorium. The next award presentation was beginning. I exhaled slowly. "I need to finish this night," I said. Jo smiled. "Go. You've earned every moment of it." I stood and walked back inside, head high, shoulders square. The crowd was still buzzing, drinks still flowing, speeches still echoing. But something had changed in me. The night had started with recognition, twisted into a confrontation, and cracked open with a letter from a woman long gone. As I crossed the hall, the gala director intercepted me with a folder in hand. "Dr. Whitmore, we need your signature to officially release the grant funds. If you'd like to transfer them to your department's research division, I can arrange." "No," I said firmly. He paused. "Excuse me. I'll be making a private allocation. The funds won't be staying with the university." He raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a recipient in mind?" I looked past him, toward a student volunteer arranging programs at the door. She couldn't have been older than 19. Her name tag read Amina. I'd seen her earlier, quietly listening to my speech with wide eyes and a nervous posture that reminded me too much of myself. "Yes," I said. "I have someone in mind." The director nodded slowly and handed me the documents. I didn't need to decide everything tonight, but I already knew. The money that came from Silas Whitmore's empire wouldn't fund prestige. It would fund possibility. I signed my name one stroke at a time. Every letter of it, Elara Whitmore, felt like a new root pressing into the ground. My name, my terms, my legacy, and somewhere in the shadows of that echoing hall, the silence began to lift. The hallway near the lecture wing was quiet, a contrast to the festive hum still alive in the main ballroom. I slipped into one of the unmarked doors, an old seminar room with dusty windows and faded portraits of forgotten donors lining the walls. I needed space to breathe. My head throbbed, a dull ache from too much memory and not enough oxygen. I sat on the windowsill, the cold glass against my back, and stared out toward the bay. The tide was retreating. It looked peaceful from here, like the past could be swept away if I willed it hard enough. The envelope from the gala director still sat in my hands, heavier than paper had any right to feel. $2 million. A gift I didn't ask for. A weight I hadn't expected. And tied to it, his name, his legacy. Silas Whitmore, a man who would rather fund strangers than face his own daughter's success. I opened the folder again. Inside was the official letter from the Hawthorne Endowment Board confirming the donation source, Whitmore Agrochem. There it was, printed in elegant serif font, as if his cruelty had been neatly wrapped in philanthropy. I had to make a decision, not just about the money, but about everything it represented. I remembered the first time I stepped foot into a college chemistry lab. It was at Fairgrove Community College, a cramped little room with flickering lights and dented lab tables. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I needed something to believe in. The textbooks were borrowed. My notes were scribbled in a second-hand notebook. But for the first time, I felt awake. Alive. There had been a moment, one I never told anyone about, when I stood at the back of the lab during my second semester and realized I hadn't thought about my parents in over 2 hours. It was small, but it was everything. Now, I had the chance to give that moment to someone else. Maybe to 100 someones. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old emails until I found the name. Eastbridge Youth Initiative, a program for first-generation students in low-income districts. They ran weekend science labs and repurposed storage units, taught coding from library basements, shared textbooks because they couldn't afford new ones. They were underfunded, always on the brink of being forgotten. I hit reply. "Hi, this is Dr. Elara Whitmore. I'd like to talk about expanding your program. I may have access to some resources. Can we schedule a call?" I didn't explain. Not yet, but I felt something click into place. The door behind me creaked. I turned, expecting a janitor or a staff member. Instead, it was Carlton May, the event host. His jacket was draped over one arm, his silver hair slightly ruffled, as if the evening had drained him too. "I figured you might be in here," he said with a smile. "This room always seems to find the ones who need a moment." I gave a small nod. He stepped inside slowly, then gestured to the chair across from me. "May I?" "Of course." He sat, adjusting his cuffs, and studied me for a moment, not with the prying eyes of a reporter, but with the quiet observation of someone who understood being watched for too long. "I've been hosting this gala for 22 years, he said, "and tonight was the first time I saw someone walk off the stage before the applause even stopped. I wasn't trying to make a scene." He chuckled softly. "No, but you made something better. You made a statement." I wasn't sure how to answer that. He leaned forward. "Do you know why the board chose you for this award?" I shrugged. "They said something about impact, innovation." He smiled. "That's what they tell all of them. But I was in the room when the votes were cast. You weren't just chosen for your research. You were chosen because you built something no one expected. You rose from the soil no one watered. That caught me off guard. My throat tightened. "They'll talk about your work in journals and papers," he continued. "But long after that fades, students will remember that someone like them stood where you stood. That matters more than numbers or grants." I exhaled slowly. "It doesn't feel like it's mine. Not with where it came from." Carlton nodded. "Then make it yours. Redirect it. Redefine it. Money's just a tool." Legacy is what you build with it. He stood and straightened his jacket. The room will miss you if you don't return. But take your time. As he left, I remained by the window, his words looping through my mind. Legacy is what you build with it. For so long, I'd been trying to erase the Whitmore name from my story. But maybe I didn't have to erase it. Maybe I just had to rewrite what it meant. I stood up, folded the envelope, and slipped it into my clutch. There were still pieces of this night left to face, and I wouldn't face them as their daughter. I would face them as my own. The ballroom had dimmed into its final act. The last award had been given, and the string quartet now played slower, more nostalgic pieces, as guests trickled toward the exits. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I re-entered through a side entrance, no longer hiding, no longer uncertain. My eyes scanned the room, not for Cornelia or Silas, but for someone else entirely. I found her at the volunteer table near the back wall, folding leftover programs into neat stacks. Amina, the young woman with quiet eyes and nervous hands. She looked up as I approached and immediately straightened her posture. "Dr. Whitmore," she said, startled. I smiled. "Just Elara is fine." She smiled back, awkward and eager. "Your speech was incredible. I want to be a chemist too. But I'm still figuring everything out." "That's exactly where I started," I said. "Do you have a mentor?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I work here to cover housing. It's been a lot." I nodded slowly. "Would you like one?" Her eyes widened. "Are you serious?" I handed her a card. "Very." Amina stared at it like it was a golden key. "Thank you. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," I replied. "Just don't stop asking questions. That's where all the breakthroughs begin." A loud voice interrupted from behind me. "How noble!" I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Cornelia. She stood there, arms folded, dressed in icy blue, as if she had planned her entrance to match her disdain. A pearl necklace clung to her collar like a statement of old money. A smile curled on her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I must say," she continued, mentoring the help, "very poetic." Amina looked like she wanted to vanish. "She's not the help," I said calmly. "She's the future." Cornelia scoffed. "Is this how you retaliate? Throwing yourself into causes that no one will remember in 5 years? Giving away millions like it means nothing?" I turned toward her fully. "It doesn't mean nothing. It means everything. Because unlike you, I know what it's like to want something and be told I don't belong. I know what it's like to be erased." Her lips tightened. "You always did prefer dramatics. You always did prefer silence," I replied. The moment stretched. Guests nearby were beginning to notice the tension, drifting a little closer, pretending not to listen. "I watched him leave," I added, my voice lower. "I watched him turn away from me again. And you know what? This time I didn't follow." Her face didn't move. Her mask remained. "You were never comfortable with daughters who disobeyed." Cornelia blinked, slowly. "I was never comfortable with daughters who embarrassed me." There it was, the line she'd been waiting years to say aloud. I took a step closer, my voice steady. "And yet, here I am, standing in the one room you've tried to own your whole life, not as a guest of your world, but as the one they came to honor." Cornelia's mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. "And here's the part you'll never understand," I continued. "This isn't revenge. This is reclamation. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to make sure no one else has to feel what I felt." With that, I turned back to Amina, who still clutched the card in her hand like a lifeline. "Would you walk with me?" I asked. She nodded quickly. We exited together, leaving Cornelia alone under the crystal lights, surrounded by people who no longer mattered. The garden outside was lit with soft amber bulbs along the path. I could hear the water from the nearby fountain, the rustle of night wind through manicured hedges. "Was that your mom?" Amina asked quietly. "She used to be," I said. We walked slowly, the sound of the party fading behind us. I told her about my time in school, about nights I worked 2 jobs, about crying in stairwells after failed exams, about the first lab coat I ever bought secondhand with tips from waiting tables. I told her everything I wish someone had told me. At the far end of the garden was a wrought iron bench. We sat there under the canopy of leaves, and for the first time that night, I felt peace begin to rise. "I don't have family like that," Amina said after a while. "But I do know what it's like to be invisible." I looked at her and smiled. "Then maybe it's time we build something louder." The stars were faint above the bay, scattered like soft memories across a dark canvas. And in that quiet corner of the gala grounds, I began to believe that maybe silence didn't have to be our inheritance. Maybe we could replace it with presence, with purpose, with a legacy of our own design. The wind picked up as we left the garden, sweeping through the trees like it was trying to carry something away. Amina gave me a quick hug and disappeared into the building, cheeks flushed, her hand still gripping my card like it might vanish if she let go. I watched her go, the sound of her footsteps retreating into the hum of the night. Then I turned toward the parking lot, intending to leave the gala behind for good. But someone else was waiting for me. Near the edge of a circular drive, beside a sleek vintage car that looked like it belonged in an old magazine ad, stood a man with sharp posture and a face I hadn't seen in 20 years. Augustine Price. He was my father's former business partner, the man who had helped Silas build the early foundation of Whitmore Agrochem before vanishing from public view. Rumor had it he left after a boardroom fallout, but no one ever said why. He was a quiet legend in our family lore, someone who knew too much, who spoke too little. "Elara," he said as I approached, voice gravel thick with age but still firm. I nodded cautiously. "Mr. Price." He gestured toward the fountain, inviting me to walk. I hesitated, then followed. "I knew your father long before he became the man he is now," he said. "Before the boardrooms and the arrogance. Back then, he was just a kid with a clever mind and a chip on his shoulder." "I don't need a character reference," I replied coolly. "I'm not here to defend him," he said quickly. "I'm here to tell you what he never will." We walked in silence for a moment, the gravel crunching beneath our steps. "I left the company the year after your mother threw you out," Augustine said. I tried to talk him down, told him he was burning a bridge he'd never rebuild. He didn't listen. I folded my arms, unsure where this was going. Whitmore Agrochem. Most of it was built with investors and leverage, but the patent that started it all, that came from a project you worked on, a high school science competition. You wouldn't remember, but you left your notes on the kitchen table. I saw them. Silas saw them too. I stopped walking. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your father's first fertilizer formula, the one that made him his first million, was based on your design. Crude, undeveloped, but undeniably yours. You were 16. The air left my lungs in a silent exhale. I tried to remember the notebook, the experiment, the failed contest where I came in 4th place. I hadn't thought about it in years. "He never told anyone," Augustine continued. "He claimed it was inspired by his own research. Filed the paperwork himself. I tried to push back, but I was outvoted. And when I threatened to go public, he offered to buy me out. I took the check. I disappeared. The edges of my vision swam with something between rage and disbelief. My own blood, building an empire on my stolen idea while calling me a failure. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Because legacy isn't just about what you build. It's about what you bury," Augustine said. "And I've buried this long enough." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of early patent drafts, scan notes, formulas, pages I recognized but hadn't seen since high school. At the bottom of one page, written in purple ink, was my name, E. Whitmore. Slanted and uneven, a teenager's signature. "You can do what you want with this," he said. "But now you know. The foundation he stands on started with your hands." He placed the folder on the edge of the fountain and walked away. I didn't move, not for a long time. The folder stayed where he left it, taunting me like an open wound. When I finally picked it up, the pages trembled in my grip. All the years I spent clawing toward recognition, all the nights I told myself I was starting from scratch, none of it had been from nothing. I had already built something. I just didn't know it had been taken. The rage came in waves. Then it receded, replaced by something colder. Resolve. I walked back to my car, tossed the folder into the passenger seat, and stared at it under the glow of the overhead light. My reflection stared back at me in the window. Stronger, clearer. I pulled out my phone and opened the Eastbridge Youth Initiative email thread again. I typed a new message. I'd like to increase the donation to $5 million. And I'd like to rename the program. I paused, then typed, the Whitmore Fund for Displaced Genius. Let the name be a thorn. Let the name be a reminder. And for once, let it carry the truth. The next day arrived wrapped in gray skies and an unusual silence. Hawthorne Bay's waterfront district was half asleep, the cobbled streets wet with rain from the night before. I sat in a window booth at Marlowe's, a quiet cafe near the university, where I had reserved a table for 4 and arrived alone. It was a bold choice. Too sentimental, too exposed. But I needed to confront this emptiness in the most literal sense. I had called ahead, asked them to set the table with name cards. Elara, Cornelia, Silas, Joe. I stared at the empty chairs, watching droplets slide down the glass like slow tears. In front of me sat a pot of coffee untouched. I didn't invite them because I expected closure. I invited them to see who would bother showing up. And at 1:30, a single figure did. Joe. She walked in wearing a rain-spotted coat and that same confident stride that always made her seem both defiant and free. She paused when she saw the table. Her eyes scanned the names. You really wrote theirs, she said, removing her coat. They always said Sunday dinners were sacred, I replied. Thought I'd test the memory. Joe sat across from me and placed her phone face down. You know they won't come. I know, I said, pouring us both a cup, but the invitation still matters. She took a sip, then leaned back. So, what now? I opened the folder Augustine had given me. I had stayed up the entire night reading it again and again. Page after page, there it was, my teenage curiosity turned into profit by someone who claimed I had disappointed him. I'm going public, I said. Joe's brow arched slightly. That's war, Elle. It's truth. I don't doubt it, she replied. But it won't change them. It won't make them love you. I don't need love from ghosts, I said softly. I need a clean slate. She watched me for a moment, then nodded slowly, then burned the old ledger. Write a new one. As if summoned by that line, my phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. I stared at it before opening. Asterisk, you think rewriting history makes you right? It doesn't. You're still an embarrassment. Don't contact us again, asterisk. No name. No signature. But I knew the voice behind it. Silas. I turned the screen toward Joe. She read it, then shook her head. Still too much of a coward to sign his own cruelty, she muttered. I deleted the message. Let's eat, I said. I'm starving. We ordered without another word about the Whitmores. While we waited, I updated the donation paperwork on my tablet, raising the total to $5 million and finalizing the renaming of the fund. The Whitmore Fund for Displaced Genius would not be a memorial, it would be a reclamation. By dessert, Joe handed me a small envelope. From the lawyer, she said. Grandmother's will. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single-page addendum, signed and dated, a quiet bequest. Asterisk, to my granddaughter Elara, I leave the deed to the Whitmore cottage in the northern hills. My son and his wife have no use for it, but she might. She was always the one who saw beauty in places no one else did, asterisk. I blinked at the paper, then folded it back into the envelope. Cottage? I asked. Joe smirked. Stone chimney, slanted porch, and a garden gone wild. It's yours now. I felt something shift again. Not closure, not forgiveness, but space. A space that belonged to no one but me. That night, I drove up the coast in silence. No music, no calls, just the sound of tires against wet pavement and the map guiding me into the trees. The cottage appeared just before dusk, tucked behind a crooked fence and swallowed by ivy. It looked like something out of an unfinished painting, untamed and waiting. I stepped out of the car, walked up the path, and turned the old brass key in the door. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and dust. The floor creaked with each step, but not in protest, in welcome. I stood in the middle of the main room, rain pattering against the windows, and exhaled deeply. This wasn't a house. It was a beginning. A place where my name didn't have to compete with theirs. A place where silence could become something else entirely. Morning light spilled into the cottage through gauzy curtains, casting golden stripes across the wooden floor. I hadn't slept much, but it didn't matter. There was a strange kind of peace in the air, like the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally come home. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, sipping tea from a chipped mug I'd found in one of the cabinets. The place had been untouched for years, yet everything felt familiar. A soft shawl on the armchair, a notebook with a pressed leaf still tucked inside. My grandmother's presence lingered in small things, in the way she arranged the books by spine color, or how every window had a clear view of the trees. I was no longer looking over my shoulder. Today, I would reclaim what was buried. I spent the morning drafting an open letter to be published in 3 major science and education journals. It began simply, my name is Dr. Elara Whitmore. And for over 20 years, I believe my scientific journey began in a college chemistry lab. I was wrong, I wrote the truth, not just about the formula, about being silenced, about what it means when your origin story is stolen, then weaponized against you. I included excerpts of the original notes. I included the scans Augustine gave me. I signed it with my full name and added a postscript. I am not asking for credit. I am asking for light. So no one else has to bloom in the dark. By the time I sent it, my hands were steady. The first response came within hours, an editor from the Chronicle of Science requesting permission to reprint the letter in full. Then a flurry of requests. Journalists, former classmates, universities offering honorary titles and apologies cloaked in polished words. But I wasn't chasing apology. I was anchoring truth. The silence broke wider when Whitmore Agrochem released a brief statement calling the claims a misinterpretation of creative youth and industrial refinement. The phrasing was cold, legally measured, and painfully familiar. But it didn't matter, because the court of public reckoning didn't run on formality. It ran on memory, and the people remembered. Students began sharing their own stories, of stolen ideas, of erased credits, of being told their voices were too small to matter. What started as my voice became a chorus. A week later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten in ink I recognized. Joe. Inside was a single photograph, me at 16, standing on the back porch of the Whitmore estate, holding a spiral notebook with stained fingertips. There was dirt on my jeans, a pencil behind my ear, and a smile on my face that I hadn't seen in years. The caption on the back simply read, "Before they knew how much you'd matter." I cried then, not because of grief, but because I finally saw the whole picture. The girl, the woman, the war, the rise, and none of it was wasted. I returned to the Eastbridge Youth Initiative, this time in person. The facility was small but bursting with energy. Students bent over microscopes, some drawing molecules on whiteboards that had been donated just last month. I was introduced as a new program director and legacy benefactor. I corrected them gently. Not legacy. Soil. I'm here to help you plant. One student raised her hand and asked if it was true I gave away millions. I smiled. Only the parts that were never mine to keep. That night, I hosted a small gathering at the cottage. Joe came, of course. So did Amina. A few young scholars from Eastbridge filled the chairs, laughing too loudly, asking questions I didn't always have answers to. It wasn't a gala. There were no suits, no champagne, no gold plaques. Just books on the floor, soup in mismatched bowls, and a fire crackling in the hearth. I stepped outside for a moment alone, the air crisp with late spring chill. The stars above the trelline blinked like quiet witnesses. And then, without warning, I whispered aloud into the dark. Silas, Cornelia, I forgive you. The words didn't echo. They didn't ring like triumph. They just settled, like rain returning to earth. Because this chapter wasn't about them anymore. It was about what grew after. And the soil beneath my name had finally become mine. The cottage had grown into something living, something more than timber and stone. The ivy on the fence no longer looked like neglect. It looked like arms, reaching out, embracing every inch of the land that time and memory had once abandoned. I found myself waking earlier, sleeping deeper, and filling each day with the kind of work that didn't need applause to feel meaningful. Each morning, I walked the edge of the old garden with a notebook in hand, sketching ideas for the youth science curriculum I was developing with Eastbridge. The program was no longer a concept on paper. It was real. fully funded, renamed. It would launch in the fall with satellite locations across 3 counties. The grant had become something alive, breathing in every student who had been called too messy, too strange, too late to matter. And yet, despite the warmth of new beginnings, the shadows of the past hadn't entirely left. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, sealed with gold wax. I opened it slowly. Elara, you are mistaken if you believe that casting stones in public will grant you peace. You are not the only one who sacrificed. You were a child. You didn't understand pressure. In this family, there are no heroes. Only survivors, asterisk. Asterisk, do what you must. Just know that blood remembers, asterisk. There was no signature. But I knew the voice. Not Silas. Not Cornelia. It was from my cousin, Malcolm, Silas's chosen protege. The boy they groomed when I failed to bend. He'd been handed the company's future the moment I left, molded to echo my father's ideals. I folded the letter and placed it into the fireplace without hesitation. The flames caught instantly, curling the edges until the words turned to ash. Jo was visiting that evening. She watched me from the armchair, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "That from Malcolm?" she asked. I nodded. "Always thought he wore resentment like a suit," she muttered. "Tailored and pressed, just for you." I smiled. "He can keep the suit. I don't want it." Jo leaned back, eyes drifting toward the ceiling beams. "You know, your grandmother wanted this place to be a retreat for the women in the family. A place where they could come and stop pretending. She never told me." "She couldn't," Jo said. "Cornelia forbade it. Said giving you that cottage would encourage rebellion." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" Jo lifted her cup. "Cheers to rebellion." The next morning, I found a package at the door. No note, just a hardcover book wrapped in brown paper. It was an old textbook, asterisk, soil systems and sustainable futures. A bookmark protruded from a random page. When I flipped to it, I found a handwritten annotation in the margin. Asterisk, the ones who fix the ground are rarely remembered. But nothing grows without them. Asterisk. I traced the handwriting with my fingers. It was mine, my teenage self, scrawling notes in a book I hadn't seen since college. Someone had returned it. Perhaps Augustine. Or someone else who believed I should hold my own history. The days grew longer. Spring folded into summer. The Eastbridge team visited the cottage often now. The garden became a teaching space, the garage a lab in progress. Amina took the lead on converting the storage room into a mini green lab. She called it Project Root. She wasn't the only one blooming. A quiet came over my life. Not silence, the kind I used to fear, but a quiet that stayed. A quiet I chose. I had not been born into peace. I had made it, and every day I chose to keep it. The noise from the past became less urgent. I still received messages from journalists. I still read headlines where my name appeared beside his. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The world could tell its stories. I was writing my own. Late one night, I lit a candle and returned to the final pages of my notebook, the one I had used since the gala. I wrote a single line at the bottom of the last page. Everything they tried to bury grew anyway. I closed the book, not because the story had ended, but because the ground was finally ready for something new. The grand opening of the Eastbridge satellite campus began on a warm autumn afternoon. The air in Hawthorne Bay had shifted, no longer clinging to the past like damp fog, but lighter, clearer, as if the season itself had turned a page. The event was small by design. No suits, no corporate banners. Just students, mentors, and soil under their nails. The old civic center had been transformed. Where rust once lined the windows, now ivy climbed upward in deliberate, hopeful lines. Classrooms had been painted by students themselves, every wall filled with colors and chemical formulas. In the main lab, Amina had mounted a glass plaque near the entrance. I hadn't known about it until I saw it that morning. The Whitmore Fund for Displaced Genius. Asterisk, founded by those who were never supposed to matter. For those who always did, asterisk. I stood in the doorway, my breath catching, surrounded by noise and laughter I no longer felt like a stranger to. Someone tapped my shoulder. It was Carlton May. He smiled gently. "Quite the garden you've grown." I laughed. Funny what you can do when no one's watching. He handed me a folder. You might want to take a look. It's a copy of this year's nomination list for the National Scientific Coalition Awards. You've been shortlisted again. I glanced at the page. My name was there, under the heading, Social Scientific Impact, Multi-Regional Programs. But for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to hold it up like a trophy. I felt detached, not numb, fulfilled. I don't think I'll attend, I said. Carlton raised a brow. Really? I nodded. Let someone else take the stage. I've had my moment. Now it's their turn. From across the room, I saw Amina helping a young boy set up a demonstration table. He was maybe 10, wide-eyed, covered in graphite, and grinning like he'd just solved the world's biggest mystery. I walked outside into the golden light. The parking lot had become a gathering space. Parents in folding chairs, former students turned instructors, and at the far edge, beside a flowering garden of native plants, sat a wooden bench bearing a carved inscription, in memory of those who were never heard. I sat there for a while, letting the hum of voices settle behind me. The breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle and dry leaves. I closed my eyes and let it all sink in. It was never about revenge. It wasn't even about reclaiming. It was about planting something that would outlive me. I returned to the cottage that night, just as the sky began to change. Dusk spread across the treetops like a slow-burning ember. Inside, the fire was already crackling. Joe had dropped by earlier, left a basket of pears and a handwritten note. Asterisk, they only ever built walls. You built doors. Keep opening them. Asterisk. I ran my fingers across the spines of the books stacked on the windowsill, the ones that had guided me through every era of my life. And then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old filing cabinet in the study. Inside were boxes of research, essays, failed grant proposals, relics of a climb few had seen. I pulled out one folder, thick and heavy with drafts. It was labeled in faint pencil, Project Silas, the original compound. I flipped through the pages. The formulas were crude. My notes were frantic, written in late-night bursts. But the bones of it were brilliant. I took a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not for them, not for vindication. For legacy. My real legacy. The one I would pass down not through companies or awards, but through the minds of those who had once been told they were too broken to bloom. Sometime after midnight, I stepped outside with a lantern and walked to the edge of the overgrown garden. The stars above were sharp and unafraid. I knelt near the crooked fence, dug a small hole, and buried a final envelope beneath the soil. Inside it was a photograph of 16-year-old me holding that spiral notebook, and a note that simply said, I made it. The soil was soft. The silence was kind. And what I left behind no longer had to be spoken to be heard.